Hello everyone, Tom Simmons coming to you today from Pisgah State Park in Winchester, New Hampshire. And this is the largest state park in all of New Hampshire. It actually is in 3 different towns, Winchester, Chesterfield, and Hinsdale. And when I came in here today, there was no parking attendant telling me where to park or collecting a fee. And there were no rangers out and about. No one doing work at the park, no concession stand. In fact, you won't find many state employees here at all. Because in New Hampshire, the culture is such that the state for many, many years has bucked the trend in surrounding states in not wanting a heavy government presence. Whereas Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, New York, all spend about $7,000 to $8,000 per person. That's what government spends in those states. In New Hampshire, that number is under $4,000. In New Hampshire, the state legislators get paid a grand total of $200 each every year. There's no state income tax and no state sales tax. The entire approach to government and government spending is very, very different than what most of us are raised with in many, many other places around the United States. And I decided to do this particular video here because I'm going to introduce there's 2 lessons and 2 videos that I'm going to be making on the concept of government failure. Many students of economics, many economists, we'll look at the 3 different main sets of policy tools that have been developed for government to attempt to help a stalled economy. Fiscal Keynesians want to engage in taxing and spending policy in order to adjust the economy. Those who follow monetary policy prefer to use the Federal Reserve Bank to manipulate investment and savings levels and loan levels. And those who prefer supply-side policy want government to step in and aid or help business. This video is going to look at the historical background, the historical precursors to what we call classical economics. Classical economics takes the opposite approach from all of those other approaches I've just mentioned. Instead of saying the economy is somehow out of whack, it's maladjusted, and we need to get government to do something to fix it, classical economists say the exact opposite. They say the market is the way to fix an economy that is somehow not functioning well. And they see government as being a force that is more likely to make it more difficult to fix the economy, more likely to mess it up. So for this video, what I'd like to do is go through a little bit of history as to how this particular philosophy came to be. And if we go back to the discovery of the Western Hemisphere by European colonists, the predominant economic theory at the time, the predominant economic structure at the time, was something called mercantilism. And mercantilism is a system whereby the government, in that case it was the crowns, the royal houses of Europe, whether it be Britain, Spain, France, the Netherlands, where government worked hand in hand with certain favorite businesses. And the government would grant monopolies to those businesses and give rights to land to those businesses. And those businesses were expected to make money for the government. In other words, it was a very, very close relationship between big business and the government. And that's how, if you've ever seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you notice the British East India Company, which was granted a monopoly for transatlantic trade by the British Crown. And they worked very closely with the British Crown. Same thing with the Dutch West India Company. This was the standard, the SOP back in the days of exploration. You couldn't go into competition with one of those favorite companies if you wanted to, because the government had established these monopoly situations. And if the company ran into fiscal trouble, chances are government would somehow bail them out. That's known as a mercantilist system. And there were 4 strains that came together in opposition to this type of a system. The very first opposition that we see recorded in history to this kind of an arrangement came from a group of Dominican monks in Spain called the Hispanic Scholastics. And the Hispanic Scholastics, as I said, these Dominican monks, were teachers, and they were mostly headquartered in Salamanca, Spain. And at the time, Spain had colonized much, probably the majority, of the New World, and it was these Dominican monks who began writing in opposition to the policies of the Spanish crown. And they did so from a moral perspective. And they wrote that to tax the people, to support these favored big transatlantic explorations was wrong. They said it was wrong that a company, when they make a profit, should keep a profit, but if they make a loss, the people should be taxed for it. They held, from a moral perspective, that it was wrong to tax the poor to the point where they couldn't even afford to live anymore. And scattered throughout these writings, we begin to see a reaction against a powerful government involved in the economy, and a powerful government involved with powerful large companies. The second strand that came into this non-government interference approach was Adam Smith. And Adam Smith is often seen as the father of economics, or the father of capitalism. And he wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. And in that book, he complained, just as the Hispanic Scholastics did, he complained about the incestuous relationship that the British Crown had with certain favorite businesses. And I don't often read in these videos that I produce, but there's a particular passage from The Wealth of Nations that sums up Adam Smith's outrage at this close relationship between the government and business. And I just like to, I'm going to read that passage for you. It's got a lot of archaic language, so I'll explain it afterwards. But the setup here is that in the late 1700s, Britain was going through the Industrial Revolution. And that means there were very large factories, especially involved with the making of textiles. And so you had a lot of poor people throughout the countryside raising sheep and shearing them for the wool and delivering it to these enormous mills that were now making textiles and fabrics using automation. So, one of the things he writes about that situation is this. Our spinners are poor people, women commonly, scattered about in all different parts of the country, without support or protection. It is not by the sale of their work, but by that of the complete work of the weavers that our great master manufacturers make their profits. As it is their interest to sell the complete manufacture as dear, so it is to buy the materials as cheap as possible. By extorting from the legislature bounties upon the exportation of their own linen, high duties upon the importation of all foreign linen, and a total prohibition of the home consumption of some sorts of French linen, they endeavor to sell their own goods as dear as possible. By encouraging the importation of foreign linen yarn, and thereby bringing it into competition with that which is made by our own people, they endeavor to buy the work of the poor spinners as cheap as possible. They are as intent to keep down the wages of their own weavers as the earnings of the poor spinners, and it is by no means for the benefits of the workmen that they endeavor either to raise the price of the complete work or to lower that of the ruder materials. It is the industry which is carried on for the benefit of the rich and the powerful that is principally encouraged by our mercantile system. That which is carried on for the benefit of the poor and the indigent is too often either neglected or oppressed. Now let me try and put that into modern day English for you. Poor people, poor women commonly, scattered around the country of Britain, are raising these sheep and selling wool to the big factories. These enormous factories are hiring weavers to take the wool and make it into textiles. At the same time, these mill owners are getting the British Crown or the Parliament to pass laws prohibiting the importing of linens from other countries. In other words, there's an embargo. You can't bring linens in from France or from other places. But it's okay to bring the raw materials in for them. And what Adam Smith is outraged at is that everything the legislature is doing is being done to line the pockets of the wealthy mill owners. The mill owners are not paying a good or a fair price to these women scattered around the country shearing sheep. They're not even paying a good price to their own workers, the weavers. But then they have the audacity to stop competition from coming into the country. So they pay people poorly, they sell their own goods with no competition whatsoever at very, very high prices. In addition to that, they've gotten subsidies from the government, meaning the government has taxed the people and given funds to these mill owners to help them sell their goods in other countries. Again, this tight, incestuous relationship between government and big business that hurts the poor. Adam Smith was outraged by this. And because he was outraged by this, he wrote The Wealth of Nations in an effort to articulate an alternative, a different system. And that different system that he came up with, we all call capitalism. Now, here is the ironic part of this. For many people, if you say, hey, what does capitalism mean? In many people's minds, capitalism means, oh, that's business doing whatever they want and growing big and powerful and monopolistic and hurting small people. Actually, that's not capitalism. That's mercantilism. And that's exactly what Adam Smith was fighting against. Throughout his writings, Smith called for markets. Markets that did not protect big business, did not grant them monopolies, did not fork over tax money to them when they needed extra money, and did not prevent competition from entering the country. He called for a right for people to control their own profits, and that means wages as well as company profits. And of course we all know that's not an absolute right that we have today, because some of what you earn gets taken away in taxes. He called for an absolute right to property. And again, that might sound like he's favoring the wealthy here, but the reality is most people in Britain at the time were tenants who could be thrown off of their land at any time if they didn't produce or pay rent. He wanted people to have rights to ownership, to property, to the means of production, not just the wealthy. He wanted the right to compete. If a French manufacturer of linen wanted to send clothing to Britain, or a Dutch or a Spanish or a Danish manufacturer wants to send clothing to Britain, that's good. Let there be competition. And the fourth pillar, you've got right to property, right to your profit, right to compete. The fourth pillar is the consumer's freedom of choice. The right to choose from among all of these different choices. Let the people decide what they want, what is best for them, and let the market determine which businesses succeed and which businesses fail. Don't let government choose favorites beforehand. Otherwise, you end up with situations like, well, the bailout of the large banks during the most recent fiscal crisis, or government using tax money to help specific auto industries when in fact the consumers have chosen a different brand. That's exactly the kind of thing that Adam Smith was writing and railing against. So when we look at the current relationship between the U.S. government and businesses, we can't call it a strictly capitalist nation, even though we do have the most capitalist nation, or one of the most capitalist nations in the world. Because the fact remains that government does step in and work with big business, and that's exactly what Smith was against. Of course, he wrote this in 1776, the year of the American Revolution, and many of his principles, the right to life, liberty, and property, prohibitions on Congress putting a tax on exports, many of these things found their way enshrined into our Constitution. Are we a pure capitalist nation? Absolutely not. Are many of the things that people complain about examples of capitalism? Actually not. It's actually more a reversion to a mercantilist system, what some people would call crony capitalism. And if you hear that phrase, crony capitalism, what we're really talking about is a reintroduction of mercantilism, that relationship between government and big business. The third strand of philosophy that comes into this classical approach to economics is by Frederic Bastiat, who is writing in France in the first half of the 1800s. And he's seeing a lot of, he writes from a political perspective. He sees a lot of use of government systems to enrich certain people at the expense of certain others. And he writes they call it a pamphlet, The Law. But of course it's not a pamphlet at all, it's pretty thick. And he writes The Law. And here is his explanation of what's going on in France at the time. He says, look, people will do, if people want something, they're going to take the fewest steps necessary to get it. That's human nature. If I'm going to walk, from here to there, I'll walk in a straight line. I'm not going to walk in this round, circuitous path. I'll do it the easiest way. And so, of course, if people can get something for free, then that's the natural way to do it, rather than have to give something up, like money. So because people would prefer to grab things free if they can, you need to have some law. But for the law to be effective in preventing them from stealing, it's got to have some teeth, some authority. And the problem is, once you give government authority, you are then giving them power to act in their own self-interest. So if you're going to have government to enforce laws and make sure that no one is hurting anyone else, you better make sure that government is chained up and starved and very, very limited in its power and authority. Because if you don't, it's going to do whatever it wants to do to enrich itself and people close to it. And in fact, that's what he says has happened in France already. And he calls it legal plunder. He says, and I quote, "The current system is just a way for everyone to get rich at everyone else's expense. If I go to rob someone and take something from them, everyone agrees that's wrong. So instead, what has happened is, I don't take it directly from them. I go to government and I say, 'Oh, wonderful government, this is so unfair. He has a widget and I don't have any widgets. Isn't that wrong? Go, take it from him and give it to me.' And so, what I am not able to do myself by robbing my neighbor of his widget, I do anyway. I simply get government to do it for me. I get government to take his widget, or to tax him, and to give me the widget or the money to get my own widget. So we have now legalized theft, and he calls that legal plunder. So we have the moral thread of the Hispanic Scholastics saying that government making people poorer is morally wrong. We have Smith from an economic perspective saying this whole system of creating monopolies and favoritism is economically bad. We have Bastiat in France saying that it's politically wrong to do this. And then the last thread is someone who was alive during our lifetime. And that's Friedrich Hayek, who is from Austria, which is why sometimes the classical school of economics is also called the Austrian school of economics. And Hayek lived in a time where he also saw the rise of fascism in Germany and Austria, and where he saw the rise of authoritarian governments, and it scared him. And he fought in World War I, and he hated war, and it left a permanent mark on him. And so he too was concerned with the power and authority of government. Hayek spent his entire life in the 20th century fighting John Maynard Keynes. If you remember from my fiscal policy videos, Keynes said the way to fix an economy, the way to fix it, is for government to enact spending. Spend, spend, spend. Borrow that money and spend it. Give tax cuts to the people and make them spend it. Tell them, spend your money. He said savings was bad because it took demand out of the economy, and what we need to do is create demand, and that will get the economy back going again. Hayek said, absolutely not. That is the wrong way to go. And as I said, he spent his life fighting Keynes on this particular issue. Hayek said the exact opposite. He said if government just spends money when people really don't want to spend, when they're afraid of spending because times are bad, it gives a false signal to the economy. And producers begin thinking, oh, there's money around, people are buying things, so let's ramp up production again. And then they find themselves worse off than in the beginning, because at some point that dries up. It can't go on forever. Hayek said, what you need to do is let people save. Let them be responsible. Do not get into debt. Do not go spending 15, 20, 25 cents of every dollar paying interest on a debt to banks. Let people save. And when they save a lot of money, and that money is in the banks, that is a signal to producers that it's a good time to borrow money and invest and expand, because the people have enough buying power to actually go out and purchase the products you're looking to create. These two men spent an entire life fighting each other. Both of them won the Nobel Prize with completely opposite theories. So when you take these four strands, the moral, the economic, the political, and Hayek's concern with savings, you have the classical school of economics. So I actually had to stop the tape for a second because of someone who drove past here who wanted to talk to me. And the irony is, it was someone from the Friends of Pisgah, which brings me full circle to how I started this actual video. As I said, we've got these four strands that come together to form the classical school of economics that says, government, please stay out. Don't give false signals to the marketplace by spending when there's really not spending behind it, when people really don't have jobs yet. Don't give producers false signal that, oh, happy times are here again, and have them start to produce things only to have them sit on the shelf. Let economies work themselves out. Yeah, it's a little slower, and sometimes it's a little more painful, but when government steps in, they simply muck it up. And let people save. Leakage is not bad. Savings is good. Savings is what gives us a cushion and gives us confidence to buy things and move ahead and to invest. And as Hayek said, the curious task of economics is to prove to men how little they know about what they imagine they can design. Economics is not a plan imposed from the top. It is the sum result of the actions of millions of people at the bottom. And so if you're trying to plan spending at the top, you can't possibly understand what the effects are going to be or how people are going to react to that. Whereas if you let economies grow from the bottom up, from individuals making decisions, and those decisions amass together, then you have a true understanding of the state of the economy. So here I am in Pisgah State Park. As I said, no concession stand, no entrance fee, no ranger telling me where to park, what to do, largest park in New Hampshire, and none of that. So how do the roads get cleared? How does deadfall get moved off the road? How are problems dealt with? Volunteers, local volunteers. The Friends of Pisgah maintain a building, a house. They maintain signs. They do trail clearings and cleanups. I used to live on the other side of the park. My property abutted the park, and I was involved in these kind of things. People can make a difference without government spending or government involvement. Currently, my summer home is in Cherry Grove, New York. It's an island. There's no roads to get there. You have to take a ferry. Got to take a private boat to get there. And there's about 200 houses in the summer. No EMT. You don't ask government, send us an EMT. What we did was we raised the money through our own fundraisers and we hired an EMT. Government isn't always the answer. In fact, it's usually not even the best answer. And that is the message of classical economics.